Oh, welcome to the potentialization interviews and welcome to Kerry Turner, who's an expert in systems thinking, and she's going to tell us all about See the Systems, a new education system based on an international competition. So hello, Kerry. Do you want to give us a little bit of background at all first? How you got here?
Well, I guess I could. I mean, when people ask me to introduce myself, it's kind of always, where do I start? And I tend to start by saying that I left university with a first degree in mathematics and a master's in operational research, which is basically maths for business. That was back in 1985. And then I joined a consultancy called Deloitte Haskins and Sells in London. Back in 85, it was kind of the dawn of consulting. And I went through an experience lasting 20 years with Deloitte. I've only had one employer. I left that employer in 2005 and spent the next 16 years of my life in France. And I'll say more about what I was doing there when we get into the interview. And it's just this last year that I've been looking at this brand new initiative, but actually I've been working with children, trying to bring the systems thinking and system dynamics to children since about 2008.
Cool, thank you. So there's a lot of history there, isn't there? As we're going through, apologies if I'm looking at other things because I'm organising things in the background as well. Sometimes we've got somebody in the background helping, but I'm doing everything today. So,
okay.
So do you want to tell us? You've used a different term here because I've heard the term systems thinking, but system dynamics as well. Do you want to tell us what systems dynamics is?
Yeah. Okay. Well, systems thinking is what it says on the packet. It's about thinking. Okay. System dynamics is a little bit bigger than that. It's not just about thinking and understanding the world. It's a whole approach for learning and acting in the world. And I think I need to give you a little bit of the history of it. It was created by a guy called Jay Forrester at Massachusetts Institute of Technology in the States. And what happened, not many people know this, but we would not be talking right now if it wasn't for him. In fact, none of us would be using these devices like computers and smartphones if it wasn't for him. He was one of the people that created RAM, random access memory. And then afterwards, he created the computer, the computer as we know it anyway, in its infancy. And he had a big idea. He thought, what if I could create a model, a micro world on my computer, so I could replicate the real world and then play with it and understand how it might behave under different sets of circumstances. Okay. Now, he created a language, a programming language called Dynamo, and created a model called World 1. And World 1 is a pretty interesting model of all of the basic relationships driving the performance of the world. So for a mathematician, it was an incredibly elegant model. Very few variables, things like population, pollution, resources, both non-renewable and renewable, health, big things like this. And he just made some discoveries about what might happen to the world when he simulated that model. And he shared those discoveries in a paper back in 1971, a paper called The Counterintuitive Behavior of Social Systems. And he took his findings to the Club of Rome and said, we've got problems. We've got big problems down the line if we carry on in the way that we're carrying on. The world we're in a reinforcing loop around population and pollution. And we need to do something about it. And we need to do something now. So that's like 50 years ago, yeah? And we didn't actually really do anything at all. So system dynamics is kind of a big idea. It has at its basis mathematics. It's about differential equations, but it's at its most basic, it's actually about understanding interrelationships because this is the way that the world works. And if we don't understand the way that the world works and we operate in a different way, we start to create a lot of problems. So system dynamics is about avoiding problems at its very basic level, okay? Now, I mean, in terms of my own experience with it, I first came across it back at university on my master's course. And it was introduced to me as being something called continuous simulation, you know, so, because operational research is very, very quantitative. And I remember building a model, I can't even remember what it was a model of, using system dynamics and swearing I would never do it again at university. And then something happened. The group that I joined in Deloitte was the brainchild of a guy called Dennis Sherwood. And Dennis had a big idea. His big idea was that we were going to take the best new approaches coming out of universities around the world and these new personal computers, because personal computers were starting to become available, and create models that would create better decisions in corporations. Okay. And back in 1987, so 2 years after I joined that organization, Dennis spotted a guy called Barry Richmond. Now, Barry Richmond was a PhD student of Jay Forrester at MIT. And I think he'd had the same experience as I'd had with Dynamo and said, you know, this will never catch on as an approach while ever we don't have user-friendly computer tools. So he finished his PhD, left, and he got some seed money from what was back then a very small Apple computers. And he created the world's first user-friendly system dynamics package, which was called Stella. Now, my boss spotted this. And what he did, he asked Barry to come over from the States and teach my group about system dynamics. And he bought an Apple Macintosh, because that was the only thing that it worked on, and a copy of this package Stella. And I was one of the ones that did that training course. And it was like I'd seen the light. I mean, I'd used lots of other modeling approaches before, but this was something else. And Stella as a package was completely different to anything that I'd ever used. And the first model I built on that training course was a model of what we then considered to be the problems around climate change. Okay, so the model I built was about the CFCs rising into the atmosphere and creating holes in the ozone layer, because we were worried about that. We were worried that we were all going to get fried because of that. Okay. So that was my first model, and in true consulting style, I finished the course on Friday evening, and I started at my first client on Monday morning. And my challenge was to build a system dynamics model of the whole of the Marks and Spencer's empire in the UK.
Wow.
And not only do that, I actually had a lot of people seconded into my team to learn how to build system dynamics models from me. Okay, so I learned big time that to be an expert, I only needed to stay 1 second ahead of everybody else. Yeah. And somehow or other, I managed to do that. I learned a hell of a lot from that experience. And then I went on to use system dynamics with a vast array of corporations and banks, building societies, manufacturers, logistics operations, you name it, I've worked in it. I've also worked in virtually every UK government department in my time in consulting.
You've just said, oh, I've just clicked on the wrong page. You've just said an awful lot of things. I mean, I'm a software engineer and I've been looking at big things, and some of the things you're saying, even for me, are like, wow, this is just amazing. So if I was to think, how would I build something that you build models in? I could have a rough or some ideas, but this concept all those many years ago seems incredible. I don't know how much you know about the internals of it and how it works at all, but and is that model still there? Has it evolved into something new?
Well, yes, and actually, you know, it evolved into something new for me, because to begin with, I was very much into building computerized models. And we use them basically as test beds for new strategies. So we test out ideas on a micro world of an organization before we went out and did it in practice. And we also did something that you would never do with your real business system. And that is, we used to look at how we could bust it. Okay, so we'd look and try and bust it on the computer so that we'd understand where the risks were in the business, you know, how sensitive the business was to certain things, the business system. And then something happened to me. And interestingly enough, you know, I started off with system dynamics at a retailer. And the last system dynamics model I built for a corporation was actually for Kingfisher, another big UK retail empire. And I always remember I was sitting in the finance director's office, simulating different strategies on this model. And some of them would come out, and this was right through to financials, you know, so he'd get the projections for things, and he'd be looking at them and he'd be going, there'd be something that looked amazing, okay, like a no-brainer, you're gonna put this initiative through. And he'd look and he'd go, no, I'm not buying that, and put it on one side. And then something else that looked barely viable, he'd look and he'd go, do you know, I think I could make this work. And I was sitting there thinking, hold on, what's happening here? There's something weird happening. So I said to him, look, you've spent a lot of money for me and my organization to build this model, and yet you seem to be ignoring everything that it's telling you. And he said, oh, no, I'm not. I'm not ignoring it. It's just a part of my choice. He said, your computer doesn't know my people. And I know I can change my people and create different teams and create a different outcome. And I was there and I was like, ooh, this is interesting. So I went back to my boss, Dennis, and said, we've got a problem. Our computers don't know people, and this guy is right. And he said, oh, there's this other guy, again at MIT, who's been talking about a lot of this. And he said, it's a guy called Peter Senge. He said, we'll go and we'll meet him. We'll go to the States and we'll spend some time learning what he's talking about, because he's talking about learning organizations. So rather than building models and simulating, he's talking about how you can use these approaches to build really strong human systems. Okay. He said, so let's go and talk to him. So we went off to Boston and spent some time. Peter at that point was, he had a consultancy called Innovation Associates. It was around about the time that he was thinking about publishing The Fifth Discipline, I think, which ended up as a business bestseller. And I learned basically about how to facilitate teams to basically share their mental models, the way that they believed their system operated, making what was implicit in their minds really explicit, and then sharing that with that group and coming to an agreed shared mental model of the way that they felt things worked. Because essentially what this did was it stopped arguments, and it started people being able to see each other's perspectives. So what you started to create in a group of people was essentially a system amongst those people of agreement and relationship and high performance ultimately. So I came back and I thought, what am I going to do here? You know, I'm a modeler. I'm used to hanging out behind a computer and hiding away. Occasionally I'll talk to some people, but actually I prefer speaking to the computer and interacting with that. Suddenly I've got to get out from behind the computer and I've got to start talking to these people. And what happened was I got invited. We used to have a standing agreement with Allied Dunbar, who were then in Swindon. And the agreement was that we'd go once a month and deliver an evening sort of session that was meant to be about training, new ideas. And this session was meant to have been about cost reduction. And somebody asked me to go and do it. So I thought, I'm not talking about cost reduction. I'm going to talk about I'm going to talk about systems thinking. I'm going to talk about how you use it to facilitate change in people. So I did. I talked about what I'd learned in Boston. And it was really strange because at the end of it, you know, I was packing away my stuff and people were disappearing. And this guy came up to me and he said, "You didn't talk about cost reduction, did you?" I thought, oh, well, at least somebody was listening, you know. And he said, "No," he said, "you talked about something that was really far more important." He said, "Look," he said, "I've been given a task of trying to work out exactly what we ought to be measuring in this organization." He said, "I'd like you to do a research project with us to explore how we could use these approaches to do that and how to transform our organization into a high-performing system." And the way that we always operated was we'd have a new idea. Well, typically it was a client actually that came with a big question. So this was a big question. And I'd been involved in a really big question when I first joined Deloitte. And that was when Bass Brewers approached us and asked the question, "We spend a hell of a lot of money on advertising. We'd love to know which half of it works. And we're not sure, can you help us?" So we set up a research project with Bass that I worked on for a number of years, exploring that question. So we did exactly the same with Allied Dunbar. We set up a research project where we had an agreement of way reduced fees to explore this. And I ended up creating an approach which we called dynamic performance management. And basically it was an approach where we embedded systems thinking throughout an organization, into the people, into the processes, and into the KPIs and performance measures.
Yeah. You're going really quickly and covering an awful lot of stuff. It's really amazing. Can I just wind back a little bit? Because I'm really curious. You started off with this Dynamo software system.
Yeah.
But then you realized there was all this people stuff involved.
Yes.
And you worked through various things about how people work and those kind of things. Did it ever get back into the system that you could update the system to be more people oriented? And or is that something that's always going to have to be people doing that bit of it and perhaps adjusting the model? Or how does that interaction and feedback work?
Well, actually, it's interesting because I still use computers, but I use them in a different way. Instead of using them to build quantified system dynamics models, and then simulating those models and looking at the effective interventions on them, what I did was skip that bit of the process. So I'd build a model that would sit on the computer, but I wouldn't calibrate it. Instead, what we do is we go and design experiments in the real world and test those experiments in the real world. Because there's one thing I've learned about models, and that's the famous George Box quote, that all models are wrong, but some are useful. Okay.
Yeah.
So the key thing for me was, how do I embed this? How do I embed using these kinds of models, A, in decision making, and then B, in action? Real action out in the real world, because that's where we get our learning. We get our learning from experience, not from playing with computers and playing with computer games and computer simulations of reality. We can get somewhere there, but the real world is far more interesting.
I might be getting ahead of myself a little bit, but are there not some systems where you can't do experiments, or not very easily, because global warming is something we can't have two planets and try one versus another? So
do you know, it's interesting that you should raise that, because, you know, in my work with children, I got really serious about bringing these approaches to children back in 2008. But I reorganized myself to try and do it more like I would have approached a consulting project in 2018. Okay. And one big thing I realized was this whole, I know it's going to sound weird, opportunity of climate change. Okay. I realized that children might finally start to get interested in big systems. Yeah, because it was going to way big time affect their future. You know, children are going out and have been going out before the pandemic protesting, But one of the things that I was taught by my boss was protest is weak. He always said, you know, don't come to me with a problem. Come to me with your ideas for a solution to that problem. Now, climate change is a really interesting, big systemic problem that affects everybody on the planet. So I saw this as a big opportunity to bring the systems point of view to the masses, really. Okay. And what I did was I looked at all the big models that are out there currently. Yeah.
The climate models.
Yeah, the climate models. There's lots of them. You know, the IPC,
Yeah.
CC's got one, MIT, Climate Interactive, they had another. I looked at all the models that were publicly available.
I'm just thinking, on that front, the climate is definitely warming up. There's no doubt about it. We're seeing it all over the place. But as a software engineer, I know how hard it is to write software and to actually get it to work properly. So I've always been a little bit dubious, not that it's not warming, but to what level and how closely are those models actually modeling what's happening? As you say, all models are wrong, but they might be useful. But to what extent are they wrong? And does systems thinking almost have a way of helping in that problem then?
Well, essentially, you know, I looked at all the models that were out there. I can share with you the paper that I wrote. I wrote a paper that I presented at York University. There was a symposium there. And then the Operational Research Society annual conference that was back in September 2019. So I presented the paper there, and essentially my conclusion from it was that you couldn't rely on any of them. They all had huge gaps,
Yep.
huge gaps. And essentially, I was much more interested in some of the solutions that hadn't been modelled. For example, there is one solution that I found incredibly attractive, because a lot of the solutions would tend to be about bringing more technology into the game. But one of the things we systems people are very interested in is unintended consequences. Okay. And virtually every technology that we've ever introduced to the planet has had unintended consequences that we've subsequently had to deal with. Okay. So the reason I liked this particular solution was it was about the existing natural systems. So instead of trying to create something that's essentially about technology and ultimately money, winners and losers in the money game that we all play, it was about reinforcing the natural systems. The big thing about systems is the language, okay? And I think I really need to introduce it here because it's really important in terms of not only understanding climate change, but understanding anything that happens in the world, okay?
Yeah, because I've got a list of questions and I've got so interested in what you're saying, I've gone completely off the question.
You know, this is fine. So I think we should do this just right now because it's so simple and so important. Okay. Systems thinking, system dynamics is a very basic shorthand language. You can use it with any other language. So I'm using it with English. I can also use it with French because I speak French, but any language you can use it with. And all it is, it's about, first of all, identifying the components in any system. We call them variables, which gives us a clue. They have to be things that are capable of variation, so of changing up and down, okay? And then the relationships between those variables. So what affects what? Yeah, which variable affects which other variable? And this is really interesting, okay? Because all the complexity that we see in this amazing place that we all inhabit is created by only two types of relationships. Only two types. One of them we call a supporting relationship. This means that the two variables move in the same direction. So they either go up together or down together. Same direction. Notice nothing about the size of the effect, nothing about the shape of the response curve. There's no calibration involved here. Just, we think that they move in this direction. So for example, if I put more effort into any project I'm doing, I believe that I will get better results. Okay, so the two things, effort and results, move in the same direction, up and down. Really, really simple. And you can guess what the other one is, because if we've got one that moves in the same, we need one that does the opposite. Yeah? They're moving in opposing directions.
So one's creating something almost, and the other one is trying to hold it back and counter it. Yeah.
Yes, indeed. So two forces, if you want to call it that. Now, this is really interesting, because what happens when you start to map systems, in other words, variables and connections between variables, using this really simple notation, you start to notice that something emerges. And that something is really critical. It's called feedback. Now, what is feedback? Feedback is basically where you start with one variable and through a chain of cause and effect reactions with other variables, return to that same place where we started. Okay.
Yes. I'm starting to feel a little bit more familiar with some of this, because some of the things I've read about climate changes, we're actually still struggling a little bit between what are the relationships and which ones feed which, and what are all of the feedback mechanisms. So I know the models are getting much, much better, but there's still more work on what those basic variables are and what those relationships are, I think. Yeah.
But in the same way, you know, it's really important to understand that there are two types of feedback. In the same way as we have two types of relationships, only two types of feedback. So one type we call reinforcing feedback. Now, we see these and we describe them as virtuous or vicious cycles.
Yeah.
We're all very good at identifying, especially vicious cycles. Yeah, things that are going wrong. Okay. But it's really important to know that the structure of a vicious cycle is exactly the same structure as a virtuous cycle. All we've done is tipped that reinforcing loop into a different direction. And the big thing we need to appreciate about reinforcing loops is their behavior. That structure doesn't create linear change in systems. It creates exponential change. Exponential growth or exponential decline. And that is really important to understand.
So in very simple terms, things can either dampen down quite quickly or explode.
Exactly. But do you know what? It's not very often quite quickly. What happens? Have you heard the story of the boiled frogs?
Yes. But go on, tell us, because other people won't have.
Well, I'm told that if you get a pan of boiling water and a frog...
And maybe we should warn people about what's coming.
Yeah. I'm an animal lover. You can probably see I've got horses, I've got a lot of animals, so I would never ever do this, and I don't recommend
that's what
that
I wanted to know.
anybody does
You
it.
wouldn't actually do this. It's a theoretical.
You would never do it. This is a theoretical thing.
Okay.
But if I were to throw the frog into the pan of boiling water, apparently he jumps straight out.
Yeah.
In the same way as if we put our hand in, we won't go, shall I remove my hand from there or not? Would we? There's no choice in it. Our body immediately reacts to that system and takes our hand away from the danger. So the frog jumps out. Now what you do, apparently, is you go and get him again. You go and track him down and get him. You tip the boiling water away. You put some cold water in the pan. You put the frog in the pan. He sits there, doesn't jump out straight away like he did last time. And then you'll all have seen the recipes where it says, bring slowly to the boil. Okay, bring slowly to the boil. Now that bring slowly to the boil process is a reinforcing loop. The way that we heat up water in a pan or in a boiler of any sort, in a kettle, yeah, is a reinforcing feedback loop. So, you know, it takes a while, doesn't it? It takes a while before the water, and that's because that heating process is going round and round that exponential cycle of temperature increase, okay? So the frog, he's in there, and I mean, when things get hot, it's not been that hot here, has it, recently? But I remember when it's hot, I feel a bit more lazy. Yeah. I start wanting to lie around a bit, and the frog does the same thing. He's thinking, oh, this is cool, this, in a nice warm bath of water, you know, and some of his systems start to gradually close down. And when he tips through that final cycle of reinforcement, because remember, it starts going quicker and quicker and quicker, it's accelerating. He doesn't know, because remember, he's only a frog and he gets boiled. Now, we're not frogs. We have these approaches at our fingertips if we want them. So if we understand these structures that we're caught within, we can make a different choice. We don't have to be a boiled frog. But often we don't do that.
So with climate change, what you're saying is it's happening slowly, so we're not noticing. We're not psychologically, and the immediate impact on us as individuals is not big at any one time. So we tend to ignore it.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know what? We keep putting off things. We human beings, when things are later, we seem to put them off. We can't understand things that are on timescales that are outside of our lifetime. You have to be able to get meta. You have to be able to see a big picture and stand back and see all of that. Okay. And it's a skill that is not really being taught in schools. None of this stuff is being taught to children.
I've just thought of something similar as well, that if you talk to people as you get a bit older about your pension, it's if you'd started putting money in earlier, it grows exponentially and you would have had a lot of money.
Do you know? That's exactly right. And do you know what? There are other structures, for example, chickens and eggs. Yeah. More chickens, more eggs after a delay, relatively short delay, they'll hatch more chickens. It's reinforcing. And do you know what? It's like if you substitute those same words, chickens and eggs, for adults and babies, human babies, or indeed for your words, amount in the bank and interest, reinforce, they're all the same structures. The amazing thing about learning about systems is you start to be able to see the same structures in different places. And you very, very quickly are able to understand what's happening in another place. It makes your learning astronomical.
The always thing was, I mean, you and I, John, have talked about the long-term being high-level thinking. We're talking about high-level complexity thinking and the ability to see beyond your own time span. Elliot Jacques called it span of discretion. Yeah. What was the last thing you said, Kerry? Because I've just ruined my own train of thought.
I was just saying that once you start to understand systems and the structures, you can transfer learning and learn about other systems incredibly quickly.
So are you talking about pattern recognition in like a fractal chaos theory, and you're looking at it, this is a pattern here, and the pattern is the same here, and you can see the same pattern here, even though it's in a different system?
Exactly. I'm talking about the same structures creating the same behaviors in different systems. In actual fact, you raise an interesting thing here, this whole thing about patterns. I don't know whether you've heard of the iceberg. It's often used, the iceberg model.
I use it.
Yeah. So from a systems thinking point of view, at the tip of the iceberg, we've got events. Okay. So like the frog, being thrown into the boiling water, and he reacts immediately. When we're operating at that level, that's all we can do. We react. If we're purely responding to events, okay, so that the frogs and a lot of animals are operating at that level. Some of them get a bit further down. They get to the level of the water, and at the level of the water, we've got patterns. This is why I raised it, because you raised the point about patterns. And patterns are when we start to observe the same thing happening over and over again, okay? And at that level, often what we do is we start to think, okay, well, there's something weird going on in this system that's not very nice. I see it keeps happening to me. What I need to do is to defend myself. When we stay at a pattern recognition level, as in just, I'm noticing these things, often what we end up thinking of ourselves is as a victim, and we need to armor up. So we need to armor up with whatever protection we might need from that system, because we still haven't got meta, we still haven't understood the structure creating that pattern. We're just observing a pattern. To be able to have agency in a system, we have to go beyond the pattern into those structures, into the cause and effect relationships and the interactions that are causing those patterns and therefore those events.
Agreed.
And when we do that, do you know what we become? We become incredibly empowered. And we realize that we have the power to have influence on a lot of systems. And yet we're taught within our existing education system, and I don't mean schools, I mean the education system in its broadest terms, our culture,
Academia, yeah.
academia, all these things, that we don't have it, but it's hidden, it's latent there. And this is why I feel so passionately about bringing this to children, because we have some really, really big problems in the world. And I don't believe, I wish I did, but I really still don't, based on all my experience working with adults, I don't believe that many of them will change. And back to the point about delays in systems, John, and climate change, I want to tell you a different story now, because I thought that it was about the delays and that we couldn't see the delays, but I think there's something else. When I first started to organise myself around children, one of my old colleagues in London said, you need to come to London and see Grenfell Tower. You need to look at the building, and we need to map what happened at Grenfell Tower as a system, because a lot of people in the UK are going to be interested in it, and it might help you to get the word out there about the importance of the systems view. So I did that. I built a model of the fire in Grenfell, a system dynamics model of it, okay? And then the idea was that then you looked at who had influence over all the different variables. And it's a very interesting picture because I coloured them all and showed how basically you couldn't, you know, what we all do, which is, you know, the lawyers try to go out there and pin the blame on a single person, ideally somebody who's got some money. Okay, yeah. So because that's the guy I was working with, he was a lawyer, and that's what he told me. He said, that's what we do. We're just looking for somebody who's sufficiently to blame with enough money to be able to extract something from them.
And then people will be happy again if we can pay for it.
Exactly. Whereas I asked a different question. I didn't ask who can we blame, and I didn't ask who was responsible for the fire. I asked, why did the people die? It's a very different question. And I looked at some of the data I looked at all the data from the inquiry and everything that was available. And there was one really two really interesting charts. One was a chart of the tower and where the people died. And another was of the number of people in the building, starting off when the first call was made to the fire brigade.
Yeah.
Through to the following morning. Of course, you know, it got to a point where it levels out and that there are people that were still in the building and never got out. Okay. But interestingly enough, you see, the way that we deal with apartment fires in tower blocks is through a process that we call compartmentalization. So what the fire brigade do is they advise that everybody stays in their apartment, shuts it all off, because this allows the fire brigade to get in and do their job. You imagine if there's everybody using the same movement corridors, it's really difficult for them to fix it. Okay, so that's what happened. They had this compartmentalization. But actually, what was also happening was that there was some realization among some of the people that things were getting out of control, right? Things were getting out of control. And there was one story of one woman in that building. So she didn't have time to build a system dynamics model, right? She didn't have time to even draw a causal loop diagram. Instead, she did everything that you would hope a systems practitioner would do in a situation like that. So she got the call from the fire brigade who said, stay put. But she thought, do you know what? I'm going to take a look for myself. I'm not just going to follow orders, as we're taught to do. You know, this is the command and control in hierarchical organisations, or the read, remember and regurgitate of our school systems. I'm going to go and take a look at what's happening out there. So she looked out the window and she saw where the fire was. And she looked and she saw how quickly it was advancing. So we've gone from an event of knowing there's a fire to looking and seeing a behaviour pattern. She quickly simulated in her head that if she stayed, she was going to die. And that nobody outside of there had the same perspective on that system that she had. So she thought, what can I do with the limited time I have available to save as many people as I can save? That's what a systems thinker would do. What can I do with what? Not say it's somebody else's fault, to say, what can I do with what I have?
So how can we make the biggest impact?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And what she did was this. She put the plugs in a sink and a bath and turned on the taps full strength. Yeah. She closed all the windows, shut all the doors, shut her own door behind her, knocked on all the doors on her floor level, and told everybody else to do the same and to get out with her. She and those people survived. And if you look at that profile of where people survived, probably bought some other people time to get out.
Yes.
Okay. There were other people that didn't. They did not leave their apartment. Despite all of this, they did not leave. Okay. And then you have to question why they did that. So we talk about, in consulting, you know, we talked about creating, I know it sounds horrible, we talked about creating burning platforms for change. Because we had the belief that it literally, there had to be a fire there for people to change. What I learned from Grenfell Tower is that even that might not be enough. And what I used Grenfell Tower actually as an example in my presentation on climate change to say, look, the way I see the world is that Grenfell Tower is kind of the world, it's a micro world in the same way as I've built micro worlds on my computer. And you know, we're all sitting there on the top floor, believing it's not going to happen to us, believing that we have enough time, that it will be put out by somebody else.
This is all starting to make a lot of sense to me. It's almost like magic systems thinking, because you're answering the questions before I even ask them. It's why is it important? And it's actually really clear, isn't it, that if we're not thinking and applying the systems thinking, if we're just doing what we've told and following the rules and not looking at how the system is working, we're going to get boiled, or we don't escape from a fire. But or with climate change, we're going to carry on behaving in just the same ways and not doing anything about it. So it's really clear. And what I'm also coming to mind is world politics between the different countries. They're still fighting amongst themselves. They're still following all those old processes. So
and do you know
I'm just starting to get a bit worried that, as you said, the adults are not going to solve this.
Well, there's another issue, and that is we don't understand the difference between a stock and a flow.
Go on, tell me, I don't know.
This is another big thing about system dynamics, okay? Understanding the difference. So a stock is an accumulation, okay? So you talked about the amount of money in a bank account, that's a stock. The amount of water in a bath is a stock, yeah? There's a stock of carbon dioxide, whatever it is, up in the atmosphere. It's a stock, okay? That stocks can only change through flows. We can't access stocks directly. And with most stocks, there are inflows and outflows, okay? So in a bath, we've got an inflow of water from a tap, and we've got an outflow which is regulating the plug, yeah, typically. With a bank account, we've got flows in, like deposits and interest. Sometimes we don't get very much these days. And we've got a flow of deposits out. They're the ways that we change out those levels. And it's the same structures with the carbon in the atmosphere, yeah? We've got flows in and we've got flows out. A lot of the policies and things that people talk about are about reducing the flows in. But what you'll know about a bath is when you turn the tap off, the level in the tub doesn't change. Yeah, this is really important to note. You have to take the plug out. You have to look at the flow out, okay? People are starting to become cognizant of this, and there are new ideas coming up about that. But yes, even if you reduce the inflow to zero, which I can't see us doing, that stock is still sitting up there, unless you work out how to get the flow out, operating more effectively and faster. Now it follows our system, right? Our system, this body, is awesome, yeah? It's awesome. It's got loads of inbuilt feedback loops. In particular, it has a lot of feedback loops which are designed to keep our body alive. And a lot of them are about temperature. You know, there's a set temperature that our body needs to survive, okay? Do you know what? It's pretty much the same when we look at planet Earth. It's exactly the same.
So the whole planet is regulating itself.
when we get out of the way and let it do that.
Yeah.
We've been interfering. Okay, I've got a model. I've got a really cute model that shows all of this, that shows how this works, how it's about the intersection between the carbon cycle and the water cycle. Okay, that's what you have to understand. And the really important part of it is green stuff. It's green stuff on the earth, and it's certain green stuff in the sea. Okay. And whoever designed this place, John.
So when green, just to make it absolutely clear, you're talking trees and grass and things.
Anything green, anything that photosynthesizes.
That takes carbon out of the atmosphere.
Exactly. The way that this works, I mean, plants, but there's stuff in the sea that's doing the same thing. They take up the carbon, take up the carbon dioxide, give us back oxygen so we can breathe. And then they hold the carbon in their bodies as structure. Okay. Then what they do, you probably noticed when it gets windy and at certain times of the year, bits of them fall off, you know, off the trees and off the plants. And you know what this creates? It creates soil. It creates what we call soil carbon.
We actually covered this very recently with Sheila, talking about how we make soil.
Yes.
And that's what they're looking into, is how can we actually make that process much more effectively? Because science, actually, this is a really good example, the unintended consequence of science saying, well, we'll put more fertilizer on, we'll put insecticides on. We know better than nature.
No, we don't.
Raided that building soil process.
No, we don't. And this is the point, you know, this beautiful, the way the system is designed, we talked about reinforcing loops, but if everything was reinforcing loops, all that would happen is that all systems would either be expanding, exploding, or disappearing. And that is not. And that's because we have these other loops called balancing loops that do the same thing as an opposing relationship. They bring balance and equilibrium into systems. We have balancing loops built into our system that keep that control of our temperature. It's the same for the environment. Okay.
When we've got the chickens and eggs going crazy and more chickens, there are foxes out there as well.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. The beauty. Yes, sure.
No, I was just going to say, I just want to check this because I think it's fantastic. The bath thing, about the things where we have to focus is getting the carbon out, gone.
Yeah.
And the answer is lots of green in the oceans and on the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds, I mean, that just makes so much sense.
And you know, it doesn't matter what green, as long as it's green.
Yeah, as long as it's green, because green is the thing that takes light and
photosynthesis,
turns it into carbon and moves it down. And yes, it's, wow, it's wow. Well, I think we need to get that message out there, nice and simple, like you just did, which is like we've got too much carbon, and we've got too much heat, and we need. I can't remember how it started now. So I've got all excited, but we just need to put that out there. All we need to do is get more nature out there. Because that automatically will get us into that loop where when we produce too much carbon, it'll eat the carbon type of thing. It'll make the carbon into trees. It'll make the carbon into more moss in the sea and things like that. So
it's also because it's not just connected. Exactly. And it's not just connected to the planet's health. This directly impacts our health.
Yes, of course it does. I mean, everything is all one system, isn't it?
And the other thing is, you think about this, that the long-term cycle, you know, we think about fossil fuels as being non-renewable. Ha, ha, ha. Yeah, we think of it that way, but it's not actually like that. It's just that we've been there's this stock of non-renewables, you know, oil, coal, different things, and they're all being created on a very, very long-term process. Yeah, so there's a stock down there as well with the flow in and out. But it's the other way around, you see, because you think what's been happening. We've been taking the stuff out from there.
Yes, yeah.
And not putting it back in.
Not putting it back in.
Yeah.
This is like in the old days, that was more of a kind of a proverb and a thing. When you take something out, you put something back in.
Yeah.
I can't remember the actual saying, but I think there was old sayings like that. You take something out, you put it back in.
Yes.
I won't remember it whilst we're here, but those kind of old adages, those ancient wisdoms,
yes,
gosh, that's so interesting now.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting. And the other interesting thing to note is this point that once you understand systems, you understand that your body is being controlled in the same way as the planet. So it gives you a direct link to it. And then the other thing I do with children is I link the body processes of temperature out into a room, out into what's happening directly outside my room, out into the atmosphere. Then you see all your connections. It's powerful when you see connections.
Indigenous peoples used to teach this.
Yes.
Indigenous peoples used these kind of wisdoms of whatever you take out, you put back, and it's all a balance and everything's in a system.
Yes.
They had that.
Yeah.
Why did we lose it? What happened in our culture?
Well, do you know,
in our bigger system to make us lose that wisdom?
Do you know what I've been thinking? And this is only coming to me really in last week, and we must spend 5 minutes, at least the last 5 minutes, talking about See the Systems.
Oh, I was going to say, we've got to talk about that as well specifically, haven't we?
Yeah, we have. But I'm just gonna, I just want to touch, you know, on this and why it happened, because I'm going to use some terms that are not systems terms at all, okay? And I'm just going to put this idea out there. I'm calling it feminine and masculine energy, okay? So it's not, I'm not calling it male or female or men and women. It's not that. It's different. It's a certain sort of energy. And I think you need both types of energy within a system, yeah? One of them's short term, one of them's long term. One of them's very go-getting and very active, and one of them is much more nurturing, okay? And when you have both in a system, you have viability. When you don't, generally, especially if it's tipped too far in the masculine energy direction, you've got big problems, because it's a big focus on the short term. Because remember, this masculine energy was all going back to your, you know, where we came from in our tribes. The men were the hunters and the women were the nurturers. Okay.
And the gardeners.
The farm, we could call it farm, instead of masculine and feminine, we could call it hunters and carers, I guess, or gatherers. But, you know, you think about that, and you think about where I certainly experienced from 1985 when I joined Deloitte, we called ourselves farmers. It was a beautiful place. You know, we were farmers, we were gentlemanly and caring, and we looked after our people and our clients as family. And you see, what happened was we merged with Coopers and Lybrand first. And the Coopers were hunters. Coopers were hunters. And you know what though? Actually, it was really good, because they liked hunting and getting new projects, and we liked caring and farming all of these new clients. And it was like a marriage made in heaven. It was astronomically good. The problem came when we then merged with Price Waterhouse, because we had 2 lots of hunters to 1 lot of farmers.
Oh no. So the balance, you lost the balance.
We lost the balance. And you know, after that, we didn't merge, we were sold to IBM Business Services. And suddenly we had about 3 or 4 or 5 lots of this masculine hunting energy around 1 lot of farming. And it was terrible. That's why I left. I left consulting for a number of reasons. One of them was that, and the way that felt to be in an organization operating like that. But it was bigger than that. I'd started to realize that what I was doing was wrong. That I was using system dynamics to optimize parts and externalize costs. And I'd seen not many people, even in the consultancy, had seen what I'd seen, because I chose not to specialize. So I worked across all sectors and all functions, and across private and public sector as well. So I got a view of the system that not many have seen. And it horrified me. It really horrified me what we were doing. And I tried to get my organization to change, and they wouldn't. And the only thing I could do to keep my sanity was to stop reinforcing that system, because I knew wherever I stayed, I was just as bad. So I left.
Can I say that there's an incredible, I'm starting to see the patterns you're talking about. there's an incredible synergy with what Steve Conley was talking about in his career in terms of the banking system.
Yes.
And we could literally say he left the banking system because he was fed up that they were all hunting the customers.
Yes.
And they weren't doing the traditional view of having a bank manager that nurtured the relationship.
Exactly.
And it was totally one-sided. I'm watching the time because it's getting really clear that if we could teach the children how this works, we've got a much better hope of making the world better over the next few decades, perhaps. So what are you going to do about it? Tell us about the system.
Well, you know,
I was going to say, how do we name this? Because this is very important.
Okay, I'm about to tell you. I have a big project. The thing is, we talk about problems, and climate change is a problem. It's not, it's a symptom. It's a symptom of the real problem.
A symptom, yes.
The real problem is our faulty way of understanding the world. The fact that we don't understand systems. There are not enough people that understand systems. And, you know, I found adults difficult to reach with these messages. You know, that any adult that relies on their living for one of these systems will not change. Because they can't, they don't know how. They have to make choices that are really tough choices like I made. So my hope is with the children, that they can create the new systems that we need, but only if they understand system dynamics, if they understand how systems work. It's not being taught in education. My big project is something that I'm calling, I've done all sorts of experiments in UK education. I'm perfectly prepared to talk about everything that I tried to change UK education top down. None of it worked because it's another system that is very, very solid on its reinforcing loops and its ways of doing things. So my latest idea is a big international competition, open to children, but indeed anybody. So children and other people can come into this. Okay.
Have to solve climate change.
Solve all sorts of problems.
All sorts.
Okay.
Yeah.
And not just come up with ideas, but figure out experiments for how they can test them in their community. So I want this to be community based. I want it to be people working together. Okay. And essentially going out then and evaluating what they've done. What sort of benefit have we created in our locality? Okay. And what I plan to do is bring all these teams onto a community participation platform, which is likely to be potentialization. I'm sure, John, we talked about this and the potential for doing that. Okay. For those teams interacting, I plan to bring all the big systems associations into this. So the System Dynamics Society, the Institute Council for Systems Engineering, the International Society for System Science, and the Operational Research Society, all these professionals who understand what I know, but are actually making money from it too, to come back and mentor some of these young people and these teams.
You could get, this could be a great TV program.
Yeah.
If you know anybody, you know, that would be a great TV program, because people do now care about global warming, but as you say, we've not really found the mindset to do anything about it. But if it's like these experiments and seeing, I think that lots of people would like to see that on telly, and it would be a great telly program.
It would, wouldn't it? I like it.
Yes. Who do we know in TV, John? Darren, anybody? Right, we'll think about that.
Well,
we'll put it out there.
Jane, that's making a film for us for potentialization, has got lots of contacts in the industry.
Oh, I mean, fantastic. Let's talk about it.
He could actually do a lot of it himself, but this sounds like quite a big job. So I'm sure they probably need a few other people. So this is almost a systems plan coming. It's a meta system, isn't it? That what we're looking at is, how do we build the program that's going to make the education so that those children will then go on and make a difference?
It's completely built for TV. I think if you talk to someone who's from TV, they'll get it straight away. Going into these different schools, getting the kids to solve climate change. I mean, it would be a winning TV program. And the schools will be competing with each other.
Exactly.
And it'd be fantastic.
Kerry,
I'm up for it.
Question on this is it time for us to go and find those people that might make the program? Are you ready in terms of your plans, or do we need to do a bit more work and then take it to them when we're ready? Or
no, I'm ready. I could show you. I've got everything worked out, and I've been socializing it, not just with the systems organizations. A lot of the corporations that have caused some of these problems, I'm saying to them that it's time to pay back. So it's time to get involved in a system like this that's about creating the new systems that we need through children.
And what's the reception from
It's
some
been
of them?
good so far.
Yeah.
Oh, well done.
Yeah, good so far.
Well,
You see, the other thing that we get into, some people have told me that I'm wrong, that it's them that have created the problem, but that's not systemic. For me, you have to give people a chance to make amends. That's a balancing loop. Yeah.
the bath image.
Yeah.
And the idea that we're panicking about creating too much, we just have to find ways of getting it back in, and then letting the children do those experiments of how we get it back in. I feel I feel like you've given me a road of hope out of this.
Oh, there is hope.
And so I think it's just, I think it's just talk. If I don't know the person that you know, John, who's into TV, but if they're a person with an open mind, we could just go talk and co-create it, really.
Yes.
And I'd love to be part of that, because I've kind of got some images already coming up in the program.
Can I ask a question before we close? Because we're going to have to finish in a minute. We've just gone over an hour. But
Do we?
is this
I don't know.
competition the seed for how we actually get people to understand that we need to change the whole education system?
Yes.
So that's what will bring it into the education system in a bigger way.
Yeah, because do you know what? I mean, I signed up to do a PhD in 2018, and the idea was that I would do an evaluation study. So I'd get some kids, teach some of them systemically, and then others not, and then measure their long-term outcomes. And I was going to use this evaluation study to try to leverage the UK government to change the education system. Okay, ha ha ha, ha ha ha. I know. I was crazy. Okay.
Oh no, I think it's wonderful. You've got to try it.
But what I've learned on the experiments that I've done is that I've not seen any PhD evaluation study that's changed anything significant. However, this could. But what it will do, you see, all these kids and teams making systems interventions on the behalf of society. What they'll then do, you see, is the people locally will start to see that seeing the world in this way has great value.
Yeah, you know,
it has value for my community. And you know, if we do that, my job's done, because actually it'll be on the real curriculum. And the real curriculum is not what we taught in school. It's our culture. It's about the way we live our lives. And I'll have made the change bottom up, because do you know what? Eventually the schools will have to change, because it'll be everywhere.
I think it's absolutely right. And one of the most powerful media in our culture is TV.
Yeah.
And I remember when I did a little video in a school, and one of the final questions from one of the kids was, "Are we going to be on TV, Miss?" And TV is incredibly powerful in our culture, much more powerful than schools.
You've got to be careful. I've been on TV, and they edit you down to make you the hero or the villain, depending on what the producer needs.
No. Well, yes, you're absolutely right. But we're not doing that. We're getting kids going and doing experiments, and I think there's already been programs similar to that.
Yeah.
And so it's a totally different format from interviewing somebody, because they can kill people interviewing.
I think that's a really perfect place to wrap this up, because we've got an action here.
Yeah, we have.
Now, anybody watching, rather than giving you lots of links and lots of connections and whatever, we've got a link which is Linktree, and that's linktr.ee. So it's Linktree, but with a dot before the double E, /POTX. If you go on there, it will take you to our social media, everything else, but it'll take you to our website where you can sign up for the email list. Because as Kerry says, we will be working together on this kind of stuff, because we need collectively to make this better. So if you go to Linktree/POTX, remember there's a dot before the EE, sign up for our email list, send us an email, whatever it might be, and we'll get you in touch with Kerry. Please contact us if you think you can contribute to this, to make a difference, to help us do it. And yes, we won't be looking to the news, to editors. What we'll be looking to do if we do this and when we do this is to make our own program that says what we want it to say to actually get this message out and hopefully set that seed to change education. So
let's get it on ITV. That's the one they all watch. Kerry,
thank you.
What's your email address? Or shall I give you mine?
I'll put it in the chat.
You can get mine in the you can get
put it in the chat.
Yeah.
And I'll make sure that everybody can reach Kerry through our site as well. So that BotX will take you to somewhere where you can definitely catch up with Kerry. So kerry.l.turner@gmail.com.
Is that I or L?
It's L for Louise.
And
actually, I have a website, a FedWiki site, where I've written lots and lots of things over the years. So, you know, I can give you that as well.
When we put this on YouTube, let's make sure we put these in the comments so that people can find them.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think we have to close because we've gone over an hour and we don't want the videos to be too long. So I have to say thank you very much. It was not just interesting, but really exciting that we might be able to make, it's not a change, is it? It's a fundamental reorganization of the way that we work with the world and relate to it. So yes, thank you very much. Really exciting.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Kerry.
Thank you.
Thanks. Lovely to meet you, Kerry.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.